The phone buzzed on my marble countertop, cutting through the soft hum of the morning city outside my apartment. I picked it up, balancing a cup of steaming coffee in my other hand, and froze. The message glared at me in bold letters. "You're no longer my daughter. All future matters will go through our lawyer." I let out a slow, controlled breath, feeling the silk sleeve of my blouse brush against my wrist. The words stung, but not the way they might have 10 years ago. Today, I was a different woman, measured, composed, and quietly successful. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, something deep inside stirred. Hurt, a flicker of old anger, and disbelief. I sank into my leather chair, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond my window. The sunlight glinted off the buildings in patterns that reminded me of stained glass, beautiful, fractured, and complex. My thoughts drifted, unwillingly, to the nights I spent waiting for approval that never came, to the words left unsaid, the apologies that never arrived. I glanced at my reflection in the glass. There was pride there, too, an unspoken truth. I hadn't just survived, I had thrived. And yet, the timing of this text, cold, deliberate, made my heart beat faster. Was it a warning? A threat? Or just a final attempt to assert control over a life I had long claimed as my own? I sipped the coffee, letting its warmth settle in my chest. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who had once dictated every choice, every move, now needed a lawyer to even speak to me. I set my cup down, fingers brushing a small silver locket I always wore. It wasn't much, but it reminded me that some connections, some guidance, were stronger than any family feud. And in that moment, I realized it was time to confront everything. I remember that day like it was yesterday, though it had been over a decade ago. I was 17, standing in the sunlit kitchen of my childhood home, my hands trembling around a cup of lukewarm tea. Dad's words had come out sharp and cold, slicing through the warmth of the morning. "You're being ridiculous, Maddie. You're making this bigger than it is. You need to think like a family member, not a child." I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming that made it hard to speak. I had been asking, pleading even, for him to trust me, to respect the choices I was starting to make for myself. Choices about school, internships, the people I trusted. But he waved my concerns away, dismissing every attempt at independence like it was some teenage rebellion. Mom, or rather my stepmother, lingered in the doorway with that cold, knowing smile that always made me feel small. I hated that feeling, hated how powerless I was under their judgment, how my dreams seemed to vanish under their expectations. My hands shook as I tried to explain, tried to make them understand that I was still their daughter, still a person deserving of respect, of agency. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. "Maddie, sometimes you have to walk away to truly stand tall. Don't lose yourself trying to be someone else's idea of perfect." That silver locket around my neck, her gift on my 16th birthday, felt heavier that day. A weight I could carry, but also a reminder of guidance I trusted more than anyone else in that house. Finally, I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep bending, couldn't keep asking for permission to exist as myself. That afternoon, after a particularly sharp argument, I packed a small bag, notebooks, a few clothes, my grandmother's locket, and the courage I didn't know I had. I left without saying goodbye, a quiet act of defiance that felt like stepping into another life. It hurt. God, it hurt to leave the place I had called home, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I also knew that the moment I walked out that door, I was choosing me, my future, my choices, my identity. That day, I became the girl who refused to be small, who would one day thrive despite the dismissals, the cold messages, and the people who thought they could define her. Stepping out of my childhood home was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I had no safety net, no guarantee that I wouldn't stumble, but for the first time, the path ahead was entirely mine. I moved into a small studio apartment in downtown Chicago, its walls bare, its floors creaking, but it smelled like freedom. I found work at a modest marketing firm, answering phones and making spreadsheets late into the night. My mentor, a seasoned strategist named Claire Donovan, noticed the spark I tried to hide. "You think small because you've been told you're small," she said one evening, leaning against the doorframe of my cubicle. "Stop apologizing for wanting more." Her words became my lifeline. I stayed late, learning analytics, crafting campaigns, pitching clients with a voice that wavered at first but grew firm. The first big win came months later. A local boutique signed a campaign I had crafted from scratch. I remember staring at the signed contract on my desk, my heart pounding, tears threatening to spill. For once, I felt seen, not as a daughter under scrutiny, but as a professional with talent worth recognizing. Still, I kept everything hidden from Dad and my stepmother. Social media showed only modest posts, pictures of coffee in the morning, sunsets over the city, or a book I was reading. They didn't need to see the truth. The sleek office I moved into, the big clients I landed, the bank statements growing healthier by the month. They thought I was struggling. I knew I was thriving. There were dark nights, too. Nights when I wondered if I had made a mistake. Nights when self-doubt gnawed at me, and I questioned whether I was worthy of success. But the locket Grandma gave me sat on my nightstand, silver glinting in the lamplight, reminding me of her words. Walk away, stand tall, and build yourself. By my mid-20s, I had started my own boutique marketing consultancy. I named it Silver Locket Strategies, a quiet tribute to that guidance and the independence it symbolized. First profitable project, first client retention, first mention in a small industry journal, all tiny victories that, when added together, created a life I could be proud of. What made it even sweeter was that I had done it all without their approval or awareness. They had attempted to control me, to define my path, but each success, each milestone, was a reminder that I was capable on my own terms. And though I rarely allowed myself to think about them during those long nights, the truth was simple. One day, they would see me. And when they did, it wouldn't be the girl they thought they knew. I often glanced at the city lights from my office window, reflecting on how far I'd come. Each gleaming building reminded me of small victories and hard lessons, a skyline stitched together from perseverance and quiet determination. I had built my life in secret, and it was beautiful. The invitation was brief, formal, almost clinical. Dad and my stepmother wanted to discuss matters in my office. My stomach fluttered at the thought of seeing them again, but the nervousness was laced with anticipation. I had spent years building this life, quietly, meticulously. Today, they would see it all. I arrived early, adjusting the tailored blazer I had picked for this exact moment. The office smelled of polished oak and fresh coffee, the walls adorned with contemporary art I had collected over the years. My desk was uncluttered except for a laptop, a silver locket resting beside it, my silent talisman. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the same skyline that had witnessed my nights of struggle and triumph. When they entered, their expressions were a mixture of expectation and subtle condescension. Dad's eyes scanned the office, landing on the minimalist furniture, the sleek awards lining the shelves. My stepmother's lips pressed into a tight line, her hands clutching a leather handbag as though it were a shield. They expected a struggling, timid woman, someone still dependent, still uncertain. I rose from my chair and extended a hand, smiling with a calmness that belied the tension in the room. "Good afternoon," I said, voice steady. "I'm glad you could make it." They hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I gestured for them to sit, then allowed a pause, letting the silence settle, letting them drink in the office, the atmosphere, the evidence of my independence. "Your life has changed since you left home," Dad finally said, a hint of accusation in his tone. "Yes," I replied simply. "It has. I've built a consultancy, Silver Locket Strategies. We manage clients across multiple states, specializing in marketing campaigns that bring measurable results. Our annual revenue exceeds 7 figures." Their mouths parted slightly. Stepmother's jaw tightened, Dad's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and something that almost looked like shame passing over his features. I continued, letting my words land slowly. "I handle negotiations personally, oversee strategy, and mentor a team of talented professionals. Everything here," I gestured around the office, is the result of my work, my decisions, and my independence. The tension in the room was palpable. They had assumed I was struggling, assumed I needed guidance, assumed that without them, I would falter. But the truth hit like a silent storm. I was thriving, far beyond the world they had imagined for me. Stepmother's voice trembled slightly. We didn't know. You didn't need to. I interrupted gently, yet firmly. My success was never yours to dictate. I kept it private because I didn't need validation, and I certainly didn't need permission. Dad sank into a chair, his hands clasped tightly together. I could see the conflict in his eyes, guilt, shame, and the slow dawning realization that I had outgrown the control he had once wielded so easily. I remained standing, tall, composed, letting him absorb the full scope of the woman I had become. This was the moment I had waited for. Not revenge, not anger, but the simple truth. I was no longer the frightened, dismissed girl of their past. I had grown into a woman of strength, independence, and undeniable accomplishment. And finally, they could see it for themselves. I watched them sit there, stunned, as if the air in the room had thickened. Dad's usual commanding presence had been replaced with hesitation. Stepmother fidgeted with her handbag, clearly struggling to find words. For years, they had assumed they could control me, define my life, and dictate my choices. Not anymore. I took a slow breath, letting my eyes meet theirs. I want to be clear, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I am willing to have a relationship with both of you, but it comes with conditions. Things must change if we are to move forward. Dad swallowed hard, his pride battling with the weight of the truth. I continued. First, honesty. No more hiding behind assumptions. No more manipulative messages or threats. If you have something to say it directly, respectfully, and without involving lawyers as a first step. Stepmother's eyebrows furrowed. I pressed on. Second, respect. My life, my decisions, my work, they are mine. You will treat them as such. This includes acknowledging the boundaries I set and supporting my autonomy rather than trying to control it. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Third, accountability. If you want a place in my life, it is not unconditional. You must show growth, work on toxic patterns, communicate openly, and be willing to admit mistakes without defensiveness. They shifted uncomfortably, but I could see the faint glimmers of understanding forming in their expressions. I softened slightly, allowing a note of warmth to enter my voice. I am not asking for perfection. I care about both of you. I want relationships built on respect, love, and honesty. But I will no longer allow fear, control, or manipulation to dictate our interactions. Then I added the final, non-negotiable boundary. And lastly, you must let me live my life on my terms. My success, my achievements, my choices, they are not tools for you to leverage guilt or pride. They exist because I chose to work for them, and they are mine. Any relationship moving forward must honor that fact. I could see Dad shift in his chair, shoulders tense, a mixture of shame and realization crossing his face. Stepmother's lips pressed into a thin line, her posture stiffening, but I sensed the subtle acknowledgement that these rules were fair and that perhaps it was time to change. I stepped back, letting the silence fill the room. This was my power, not in wealth alone, not in accomplishments, but in choosing the terms of connection. I was no longer the girl bending to their will. I was a woman who had walked through fire, built her life from scratch, and could now dictate how, or if, they were allowed into it. The atmosphere shifted. Fear had left the room, replaced with the quiet beginnings of respect. They had seen me as I was, strong, independent, uncompromising in my values, and now they would either rise to meet that truth or step aside. Weeks passed after that meeting, and slowly, I began to notice changes. Dad stopped sending abrupt, controlling messages. He started asking questions about my work, genuinely curious, without judgment or hidden agendas. Stepmother still hesitated at times, but her tone softened when we spoke. She seemed to be learning the art of respect and acknowledgement. I watched these shifts quietly, knowing that real change comes gradually. My role wasn't to enforce it, it was to observe boundaries being honored and to respond with measured compassion. Some days it was awkward. Some conversations tested patience I didn't realize I still had. But each small act of accountability, each moment of honesty, reinforced the truth I had always known. Growth was possible, but only if it was chosen. Late one evening, I found myself on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights sparkling like scattered stars below. I held the silver locket Grandma had given me, feeling its cool weight in my palm. It had guided me through fear, nurtured my independence, and reminded me that my choices were mine alone. That little object, so unassuming, symbolized everything I had fought for: autonomy, dignity, and self-respect. I thought about the girl I had been, scared, dismissed, longing for approval, and smiled softly. She had not only survived but thrived. Every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment of doubt had been a step toward this life. A life I could claim proudly, on my terms. And as I looked out over the skyline, I realized something profound. I wasn't defined by who tried to control me, by the messages that once cut deep, or by anyone's perception of my worth. I was defined by my resilience, my choices, and my courage to stand tall. I turned back inside, setting the locket on my desk, letting its presence anchor me. I had closed one chapter of pain, opened another of empowerment, and felt the quiet satisfaction of living authentically. Finally, I whispered to myself, almost as a mantra, I am who I chose to become, and no one can ever take that away. It wasn't arrogance or revenge. It was truth, grace, and the unwavering strength of a woman who had learned to honor herself above all else.